On a desolate winter night, in the year 1142, deep within the dark and damp confines of the Dali Temple prison in Linen, the capital of the southern Song dynasty faced a bitter, howling wind. It battered the stone walls alongside a relentless, driving rain. In this dreary, sunless cell sat a man merely 39 years of age, a man possessing the prime vigor of life. He was a man who should have been out on the sweeping battlefields, commanding great armies, and directing grand military campaigns with his signature brilliance. Yet at this very moment, he found himself forced to raise a cup of poisoned wine. Grim gift bestowed by the emperor he served. He harbored no fear of death itself. As a hardened general, he had envisioned 100 different ways his life might meet its end. He was fully prepared to fall on the blood-soaked front lines, ready to fall for the anti-Jin resistance, and proudly accept a heroic death. His body wrapped in a horsehide, having bled his very last drop, bleeding just to reclaim the lost territories of his beloved homeland. However, in his wildest dreams, he could never have imagined his ultimate demise. That it would come by the hands of the sovereign monarch, the monarch to whom he had sworn absolute, undying loyalty. The purported crime that warranted his execution was encapsulated in 3 chilling characters, 3 utterly preposterous characters known as Mo Shu Yu, translated into modern terms. This phrase conveys a sense of absolute despair. It simply means perhaps there is, or unwarranted, there was no concrete evidence presented, nor any semblance of a fair trial, relying solely on the flimsy, fabricated justification of perhaps he did it. The royal court mercilessly severed the final lifeline of the Southern Song dynasty. They killed the ultimate hope of their own empire. Profound betrayal stands as the most agonizing, heart-wrenching injustice, universally lamented in the long, sweeping annals of Chinese history. Over 900 years have passed since that dark night. The relentless march of time has buried the rise and fall of countless dynasties. Yet whenever we hear the soul-stirring lines of his legendary poem, "My wrath bristles through my helmet, the rain rests as I standing by the railing," a profound emotional resonance awakens within us. Whenever we walk along the serene banks of the West Lake and cast our eyes upon those iron statues, bound with hands behind their backs, kneeling in perpetual disgrace, or blood begins to boil, and a deep sense of righteous indignation swells in our chests. He is Yue Fei, undeniably, the supreme god of war in Chinese history. The unyielding backbone of the Chinese nation and absolute cultural totem of loyalty. To truly pierce through the dense fogs of historical time, we must return to that turbulent, blood-soaked era of shattered mountains, a time of broken rivers, to deeply understand this magnificently epic life, the profoundly tragic life of this eternal hero. To genuinely comprehend the sheer magnitude of Yue Fei's greatness, we must first intimately understand the suffocating, perilous era into which he was born in the year 1103, accompanied by the cry of a newborn. Yue Fei came into the world in a humble, ordinary farming household. During that period, the capital city of the Northern Song dynasty remained bustling. Bianjing was a metropolis, with endless streams of carriages and horses filling the streets. The surface, it projected a magnificent illusion of peace and prosperity. Endless song and dance covered up the mortal dangers lurking in every shadow. Beneath this glamorous veneer, the grand imperial edifice was teetering on total collapse, just as Yue Fei grew into a passionate, hot-blooded young man. Most catastrophic and profoundly humiliating chapter in Chinese history violently crashed down. It was known as the Jingkang Incident. The formidable, ironclad cavalry of the Jin dynasty swept down. Like ravenous wolves and ferocious tigers, they shattered the grand gates of Bianjing. Emperor Huizong and Emperor Qinzong once sat high upon their unapproachable pedestals. But they were instantly cast down from their divine status. They were reduced to pathetic captives awaiting slaughter, bound with rough ropes and driven northward, like common livestock. What an apocalyptic portrait of hell on earth this was. Once pampered concubines and the dignified high officials of the Grand Court. They were subjected to unimaginable, inhumane humiliations beneath the cruel blades, all by the hands and spears of the Jin invaders. The magnificent, expansive landscapes of northern China became a living purgatory. The common people were violently displaced, wandering aimlessly as refugees. Bleached bones lay exposed in the open wilderness, and for thousands of miles, not a single rooster's crow could be heard. The shame of Jingkang isn't yet wiped away. When will the immense hatred of the emperor's subjects ever be extinguished? This isn't just a simple line of poetry meant for casual recitation. It was the deepest, most anguished, and most furious roar, echoing from the very bottom of the heart of every courageous soul alive. The rise and fall of a nation is the profound responsibility of every man, confronted with the agonizing reality of a shattered homeland. The young Yue Fei fiercely rejected the path of cowardly survival. He made a momentous decision that would permanently alter the trajectory of history, stepping boldly forward to join the army and fiercely resist the Jin invaders. Before his departure, his mother sought to solidify his ironclad will. Lady Yao was a woman of extraordinary moral clarity. Righteousness. She performed a profoundly shocking and awe-inspiring act. Taking up a simple embroidery needle, she pierced the skin on his broad back, mingling needle strikes with drops of blood, to permanently engrave 4 indelible characters: serve the country with utmost loyalty. These 4 words, intimately accompanied by his crimson blood, weren't merely carved flesh. They were forged within roaring, inextinguishable flames, becoming the ultimate, unyielding foundation of his weary soul. From the exact moment that embroidery needle first pierced his skin, the ordinary, humble farm boy ceased to exist. His place emerged a peerless, legendary general, destined to carry the entire fractured landscape of the Southern Song dynasty, carrying the heavy burden squarely upon his own broad shoulders. Upon entering the harsh realities of the military encampment, Yue Fei was like a hidden dragon finally released into the boundless ocean. Relying on his staggering, unparalleled military genius and a terrifying courage, making him fearless in the face of death, he experienced a meteoric rise, rising up on the brutal, corpse-strewn front lines. Through sheer force of will and endless, bloody combat, he fiercely carved his way up from being an obscure, nameless foot soldier, becoming the absolute indispensable pillar of the Southern Song military establishment. Even more consequentially, he personally forged an invincible, iron-willed army. They struck paralyzing terror into the hearts of all who faced them. Known to the world as the legendary Yue Jun, they didn't possess advanced firearms, yet they operated under ironclad rules, relentlessly strict disciplinary codes that were incredibly rare among ancient military forces. Yue Fei established an absolute, unbending rule for his men. Even if freezing to death, do not tear down the houses of the people, and even if starving to death, do not plunder. This wasn't merely a superficial slogan shouted for morale. It was a sacred military law, fiercely defended with blood. On one occasion, a soldier took nothing more than a single strand of rope, an insignificant hemp rope belonging to a commoner, just to bind some hay. Upon discovering this minor infraction, Yue Fei showed absolutely no leniency, executing the soldier under martial law without a second of hesitation. It was precisely this immaculate, fiercely strict discipline earned their devotion, the undying fanatical devotion of the Central Plains populace. The people revered them as their true, ultimate saviors. Unforgiving battlefield, Yue Fei was the inescapable nightmare for Jin forces. In the year 1140, the renowned Jin dynasty commander Wanyan Zongbi struck. Widely known as Jin Wuzhu, he tore up the peace treaty, leading forces southward. For this grand campaign, the Jin spared absolutely no expense, unleashing their most horrifying, devastating trump cards on the field. Heavily armored, impenetrable heavy cavalry, known as the Iron Pagodas, supported by the highly mobile light cavalry, known as the Guizima. They were completely responsible for swift flanking maneuvers. In the era of cold weapons, a full frontal charge by such massive cavalry. It was essentially the equivalent of an unstoppable ancient tank. Wherever they swept through, not a single blade of grass was left standing. Yet Yue Fei didn't retreat a single half-step. During the monumental victory at Yancheng, facing a surging flood of iron and steel crashing toward him, Yue Fei maintained absolute icy composure. He ordered his infantrymen to wield elongated anti-cavalry swords and enormously heavy battle axes, issuing a uniquely cruel yet lethal tactical directive: do not aim upwards to strike the riders. Instead, focus entirely on chopping the legs of the warhorses below. What followed was a nightmarish meat grinder of tearing flesh and shattering steel, as the massive warhorses let out agonizing, blood-curdling shrieks. They violently crashed to the earth, and the once invincible cavalry was broken. The arrogant heavy cavalry of the Jin army was hacked to pieces, sending doomed riders tumbling into endless rivers of blood. Jin Wuzhu was forced to watch the total horrific annihilation of his army. His painstakingly built ace army was beaten into a state of sobbing despair. Looking up at the heavens, he released a profound sigh. He uttered a mournful lament that would echo through the millennia. It is easy to shake a mountain, but it is devastatingly hard to shake Yue Fei's army. Following this spectacular triumph, Yue Fei aggressively pressed his advantage, smashing through enemy lines with the unstoppable momentum of splitting bamboo, pushing all the way to Juxian town, a mere 45 miles away from the former capital of Kaifeng. In that glorious moment, the entire Central Plains erupted in fervent jubilation. The common people brought baskets of food and jugs of drink. They wept tears of overwhelming joy as they lined the streets, wildly welcoming the triumphant return of the righteous royal army. At this pinnacle of his career, Yue Fei mounted his towering, majestic warhorse, pointed his sharp sword toward the northern skies. Filled with boundless, heroic pride, he shouted to his blood-soaked warriors, "We shall strike directly at Yellow Dragon Prefecture, and there I'll drink deeply to my heart's content with all of you, to completely recover the ancient capital, and rescue the two kidnapped emperors, and to finally wash away the deep agonizing shame of the Jingkang Incident, this seemingly impossible fantasy that every Song citizen dreamt of for a decade." It appeared to be transforming into a brilliant, tangible reality, right at the very edge of Yue Fei's razor-sharp sword. Many people might naturally assume that a formidable god of war, capable of making such ruthless, decisive judgments on the battlefield, must surely be a coarse, arrogant, and violently indulgent brute in private. However, the authentic Yue Fei possessed a remarkably noble, impeccably pure moral character, a character that was incredibly difficult for ordinary men to achieve. The southern Song imperial court had retreated to the south, clinging to a fragile peace in Zhangnan. The opulent, seductive prosperity there had thoroughly corrupted the bones of countless individuals. Many generals were desperate to reassure the paranoid emperor they harbored no rebellious ambitions. They frantically purchased massive tracts of agricultural land and constructed astonishingly luxurious mansions, indulging in endless daily hedonism. Emperor Gaozong observed Yue Fei continuously achieving extraordinary military merits. He issued a decree to construct an exceedingly extravagant palatial residence for him, right in the breathtakingly scenic capital city of Linen. The emperor intended to use this magnificent mansion as a lavish bribe to win over and control this powerful general holding massive military authority. Faced with this monumental blessing from the emperor, any other official would have immediately thrown themselves to the ground, kowtowing endlessly in immense gratitude. But Yue Fei didn't even bother to cast a single glance at it. He decisively and firmly rejected the emperor's generous reward, calmly delivering a legendary, resonant quote that has echoed through the ages. "The enemy isn't yet destroyed. How can I think of a home?" Yue Fei wasn't merely utterly indifferent to financial wealth. He genuinely viewed his soldiers as his very own flesh and blood brothers. In an extremely brutal era that treated human life as entirely worthless, if any of his soldiers tragically fell in combat. Yue Fei would personally visit their grieving families, weeping bitterly alongside them. He'd routinely sacrifice his own official salary to financially support the impoverished widows and care for the orphaned children of those fallen martyrs. If an ordinary soldier fell gravely ill, this dignified commander would step down. He'd personally brew medicinal remedies, carrying the hot bowl to the sick soldier's bedside. Once, Emperor Gaozong harbored a sense of deep bewilderment. He asked Yue Fei when the realm beneath the heavens would see true peace. Yue Fei looked directly at the art sovereign with unbreakable resolve. When the civil officials don't love money, and the military generals don't fear death, only then will the world be at peace. He held absolutely no love for wealth, no matter how exorbitant the salary the emperor offered. His deeply ingrained, fiercely loyal heart could never be bought. He held absolutely no fear of death, no matter how razor-sharp the blades of the Jin invaders were. Nothing could terrify him into halting his relentless march to reclaim the lost rivers. Tragically, it was precisely this uncompromising purity that planted the most lethal seeds. The inescapable seeds for the horrific, universally heartbreaking tragedy that would soon befall him. Just as Yue Fei was rigorously training his troops and hoarding supplies, eagerly preparing to cross the mighty Yellow River, to strike directly at Yellow Dragon Prefecture and usher in his supreme crowning glory, the coldest, most venomous hidden arrow was shot squarely into his unprotected back. The supreme ruler of the Southern Song dynasty, Emperor Gaozong, sitting safely within the luxurious linen imperial palace, he was gripped by overwhelming panic. He was terrified that if Yue Fei succeeded in rescuing the captured former emperors, it would directly and catastrophically threaten his own hold on the imperial throne. He was even more petrified that Yue Fei's monumental achievements would overshadow his authority, and that a general holding such vast military power would become entirely uncontrollable. Consequently, this profoundly selfish, cowardly monarch instantly found common ground with the remarkably insidious, deeply malicious prime minister of the appeasement faction, a man known as Qin Hui. Together, they forged an eternally infamous, despicable decision to bend their knees and beg the Jin invaders for peace. Within the span of a single day, the imperial court dispatched unprecedented decrees, 12 gold-lettered urgent decrees forcefully commanding Yue Fei to withdraw his victorious armies, return to the capital, and completely cease all ongoing military operations. Very moment he received those devastating gold medals, Yue Fei stood on the rugged banks of the Yellow River, gazing longingly at the vast, occupied territories of the Central Plains to the north. He broke down into uncontrollable, agonizing sobs, letting out a mournful cry that seemed to weep blood. 10 years of arduous, agonizing effort, entirely destroyed in a single moment, as the formidable Yue Jiajun was violently forced into a massive retreat. The devastated citizens of the Central Plains threw themselves in front of the horses, their collective cries of despair shaking the very heavens. The earth, knowing they'd permanently sink beneath the crushing hooves of foreign subjugation, upon his grim return to Linen, Yue Fei was stripped of his military authority and subsequently thrown mercilessly into a dark, unforgiving prison, in order for the appeasement faction to successfully present a bloody certificate of surrender to secure their cowardly peace negotiations with the Jin dynasty. It was absolutely imperative that Yue Fei be put to death. Shizhong, another highly renowned general who had fought fiercely against the Jin, he could absolutely no longer tolerate watching this grotesque injustice unfold. Furious, he confronted Qin Hui, demanding to know what exact crime Yue Fei committed. In response, Qin Hui merely displayed supreme arrogance. He spat out those 3 eternally reviled, poisonous words, Mo Shu, Yu, year 1142, exactly on the agonizing eve of the Lunar New Year. At a time when countless families across the nation were happily preparing for warm reunions, the brilliant 39-year-old Yue Fei was brutally and tragically murdered. he died within the chilling confines of the Wind Pavilion. In the final, breathless moments before his tragic death, consumed by overwhelming grief, righteous, blazing anger, he wielded his brush to write his final, desperately forceful testament on his confession. He penned 8 large characters with enough power to pierce through the parchment. The heavens and the sun see clearly. The heavens and the sun see clearly. Yue Fei may have perished, but the true tapestry of history is ultimately woven by the collective will of people, and genuine justice will always reside naturally within the hearts of mankind. 20 agonizing years later, Emperor Xiaozong finally rehabilitated Yue Fei's severely tarnished name, officially clearing away the grievous wrongs. Sacred remains of this unparalleled national hero were solemnly and respectfully relocated, properly entombed at the quiet foot of Qixia Ridge, right along the picturesque banks of West Lake in Hangzhou, positioned directly in front of that profoundly solemn and dignified Yue Fei temple, where 4 treacherous, corrupt officials, including the despicable Qin Hui, the men who maliciously framed this loyal servant, were cast forever into heavy iron statues. With their arms permanently bound tightly behind their backs, they were condemned to kneel endlessly, life after life, generation after generation, directly before Yue Fei's magnificent tomb, forced to silently accept the endless curses and spit of thousands of future generations. This perfectly embodied the sentiment expressed in the famous, deeply resonant couplet, the couplet carved right at the entrance of his tomb. The Green Mountains are profoundly fortunate to bury the bones of the loyal. The white iron is entirely innocent, yet forged into the forms of traitorous ministers. Today, we recognize that Yue Fei wasn't merely a highly talented anti-Jin general. He is the perpetually unyielding, incredibly resilient backbone of our entire Chinese nation, throughout the incredibly long span of over 900 years since his tragic passing. Whenever the nation found itself plunging into terrifying crises of life and death, the revered name of Yue Fei, alongside his incredibly passionate and stirring poem, it magically transforms into the absolute highest, most exhilarating battle hymn. To awaken the dormant soul of China from the fiercely defiant and unyielding Wen Tianxiang to Yu Qian, from Qi to the countless unnamed revolutionary martyrs who freely sacrificed their precious heads and spilled their warm blood on modern battlefields. Those 4 monumental characters serve the country with utmost loyalty. They've long since become a profound spiritual totem, entirely embedded within the very DNA of every single Chinese person. Physical bodies will ultimately decay and vanish. Mighty dynasties will inevitably rise and fall in the endless cycle of time, but the tremendous, overwhelmingly righteous spirit of absolute loyalty and unbroken resolve, the spirit that Yue Fei perfectly represents, will continue to shine brilliantly alongside the sun and the moon, existing forever in eternal harmony with the ancient land of Huaxia. If you find yourself deeply moved to your very core by the profoundly loyal and righteous soul of General Yue Fei, please leave a like and share this magnificent story, ensuring that his incredible spiritual torch is continuously passed down from one generation to the next. Be sure to follow, and we'll absolutely see you next time.